All right, it was great to be here with all of you. I came in from New York City. As I was preparing for this speech, I reached out to a few friends of mine here who live in Korea. And I asked them, what is the temperature? What's the feeling around the startups? And obviously, people express their excitement, their energy, but there's a nervousness. There's a nervousness here, I understand. That nervousness is, will this tech ecosystem sustain itself? Will there be success? Will there be sustaining success here in Korea? And I understand that nervousness because it reminded me of when I first entered the startup world, actually. What you may not know about me is that I actually have a pharmacy degree. I went to pharmacy school, or yakde, as I guess that's what they say here, right? I didn't go to Harvard, I didn't go to MIT, I didn't go to Stanford. I don't have a computer science degree, I don't have an engineering degree. When you really think about who I am, I'm not the ideal startup person. But you know what? When I wanted to go into this world of technology, I decided to change my career because I knew there was just going to be this digital revolution, this technology revolution, and I wanted to be a part of this revolution. So when did I enter the startup world? So let me share with you this chart. This is the NASDAQ Composite Index. The NASDAQ is where Facebook and Google is traded every day, a lot of great technology companies. And this chart is from 1995 to 2005. If you look up at the very top, that red circle right there, that's March of 2000. That was the height of Internet 1.0. That was the height of the NASDAQ, March of 2000. That date is very special to me. You know why? Because that is when I joined my very first startup. I joined my very first startup at the worst timing. I joined it the month where everything started to fall apart, when all the companies were dying. And the reality was 11 months later, I was laid off. I was unemployed. I didn't have any money. I came all the way to New York City. I left my home. I came all the way to New York City, and my very first experience was a failure. It was an utter failure. And so I had a decision to make after 11 months. Either I go back home, I leave New York City, I go back home, and I say to my parents, I say to my family, it was a great experience, I learned a lot, now I'm going to become a pharmacist. Or do I stay in New York City, and do I persist on this vision of being part of this digital revolution, this technology revolution? Well, obviously I stayed. So soon after, I joined a company called Active Health Management. That's the logo on the left-hand side. That was a healthcare technology company that my friend had started. And he asked me to join, and it was a very exciting time, but it's still very early on. A lot of startups had failed, but this company had started during when everybody was failing. Now, the great thing is we were doing some outstanding stuff in healthcare. It was an analytics company that analyzed patient data, and we were really improving the lives of a lot of different people. Now, the great thing was one of our customers, it's called Aetna, ended up buying us. Aetna is actually one of the largest insurance companies in the world. So after that failure before, I was lucky to be part of a wonderful sale in Active Health Management. And it's still around. It's still owned by Aetna, and it's doing incredibly well. And soon after that, there's another company that I co-created with a friend of mine, co-founded. It's called Buzzskin. It was one of the very first websites that sold men's skincare products or men's beauty care producs. One of the very first ones. It was my first foray into e-commerce. It's a very small market, but luckily a California company came by and they wanted to buy us. So I got very lucky with that second company. And then in 2005, I joined Google in 2005. That was the beginning of what became the greatest roller coaster ride of my professional career. When I joined in 2005, we only had one product. That product was just a search engine. But over the course of 9-10 years that I was at Google, I was able to be part of this great journey. When I was at Google, we purchased Android. And as you know, Android became the largest mobile operating system. Then we ended up buying YouTube. And I got to witness how YouTube became the largest video platform. And there's been other great innovations, like self-driving cars and many other things. And what's amazing is, in 2005, Google only had 3,000 people. That's when I joined. When I left in 2014, it had 55,000 people. So I was very lucky to be part of that amazing journey, that amazing growth story. But then before I left Google, right before I left Google, I got a phone call from a good friend of mine. She is the head of global entrepreneurship at Google. And she called me up and she said to me, she asked me, Khee, do you know anybody in Korea that could be the head of Google Campus Seoul? And I said to her, what's Google Campus Seoul? And she said, well, we are opening up these hubs, these offices worldwide, dedicated to the startup community. And what we want to do is bring together startups and VCs and all these different parts of the ecosystem and really facilitate a community. And she said to me, Korea is going to be the very first hub for all of Asia. And you know what I said? Why Korea? And she said to me, do you know anything about Korea? I thought you were Korean. I said, yeah, I am Korean, but I haven't been to Korea in years. In fact, I've only been to Korea twice in my entire life. And she said to me, you need to go to Korea quick because you will be amazed by what's going on in Korea. It's just a vibrant ecosystem. And I can honestly tell you, after a few months from that conversation, I was actually in Korea. I made my first trip to Korea after a few years. And ever since then, the last few years, I've been back to Korea 8 times. I've met startup folks, I've met VCs, I've met different parts of this ecosystem, and she was absolutely right. It is an amazing place. And in fact, the New York Times, which is the largest newspaper in America, one of the most influential, last year they wrote an article that said, what Silicon Valley can learn from Seoul. So even the American press is picking up on what's going on here in Korea. And in the article, as I was reading it, one of the key things that they emphasized was that Korea's infrastructure, the broadband, the mobile speeds, are superior to any other country, essentially, which was amazing. And as I was reading this article, I was reminded of a couple of tenets at Google. One of the things that we always talk about at Google is when you build a product, you build it with a mobile-first perspective, a mobile-always perspective. The second thing we talked about a lot, and it came down from our founder, our co-founder, was that speed is the killer app. Let me repeat that again. Speed is the killer application. So then when I think about Korea and its speed, right? Korea represents what Google talks about all the time, right? Korea as a country is a mobile-first country, a mobile-always country. Korea is the killer app, right? If speed is the killer app, then Korea is the killer app in the world. And what that allows for, it allows for Korea to be a petri dish for innovation, a petri dish of innovation. However, I think the challenge here is the nervousness that was expressed from my friends when I first called them, and they said they're not sure how well the ecosystem is. They're not sure if there's a lot of momentum. They know that there's a lot of activity, but they're not sure if it will succeed. And I know that Seoul wants to be like Silicon Valley. Everybody wants to be like Silicon Valley. But I could, in my honest opinion, Silicon Valley is a very unique place. Even within the United States, Silicon Valley is a very unique place with a different construct, different set of personalities. What I would suggest to you, and what I want to share with you, is that I think the better template for success for Seoul, for Korea, is actually in New York City. And the reason is, when you think about New York and Seoul, very similar cities, right? Both are international cities, both are global cities. Both have very similar characteristics, such as significant industries located within these, right? Media, finance, healthcare, other ones. They have headquarters located in these cities, diverse talent. And you're probably asking me, why New York? Well, let me tell you something about New York. I've been there since 2000. What you may not know is that New York has been a resounding success from a tech ecosystem perspective. Let me share with you just some stats of why New York is the fastest growing tech ecosystem behind Silicon Valley. These are stats from 2003 to 2013 in a 10-year period. During that time, there were over 2,200 companies successfully created. There were 53,000 jobs created, 336 IPOs and acquisitions, over $14 billion in investment, and actually many billions more just in the last couple of years, over $18 billion in exits. And here's the most compelling stat here. 27 exits over $500 million. So there are 27 companies that exited with a valuation of over $500 million. That is incredibly impressive. And that's just in a matter of a 10-year period. And I've been very fortunate to witness this from 2000, because remember, in 2000 is when I entered the startup world, and unfortunately, I entered at the wrong time. But I got to witness all this success. Now, the question is, how did this all happen? Like, what is the how? And as I was researching, what was the engine? What was the catalyst that allowed for the ecosystem to rebound from the failures of Internet 1.0? I came across this great study by Endeavor Insight. And the study is called The Power of Entrepreneur Network. And what they did was they reviewed 3,600 startup companies in New York. They interviewed 643 tech founders in New York City, and they asked 5 questions. Those 5 questions were, who inspired you to become an entrepreneur? Who invested in your company? Who was your mentor during the growth and development of your company? Have you created another company ever since you started your first? And did any of your other employees go on to create another company? So let me repeat that. Who inspired, who invested, who mentored? Did you go on to create a second or third company? And did any of your employees go on? And this is what they discovered. Their simple conclusion was this: success begets success. What that means is success leads to more success. Success results in more success. What was happening in the New York City tech ecosystem was this: as entrepreneurs became successful, they reinvested their time, their network, their capital back into the ecosystem, back into other entrepreneurs. In fact, in New York City, 25% of all angel investments come from tech founders. To better illustrate this, the study looked at 3 particular companies. On the left side here, AppNexus, DoubleClick, Buddy Media. Those 3 companies are very successful startups. 2 of the 3 were acquired. And the question they were asking was, when looking at just these 3 companies, were other companies created? Were other companies inspired as a result? And this is what happened. From these 3, in the first wave, 75 companies were influenced and created from those first 3. Then from those 75, another 177 companies were created. And from those 177, another 227 companies were created. All in all, there were over 400 companies created that can trace their lineage back to just those 3. The point is that these entrepreneurs were inspiring and influencing. To better illustrate this or to dig deeper, I look at DoubleClick. DoubleClick was one of those companies. I know DoubleClick well because when I was at Google, Google acquired DoubleClick for $3 billion back in, I think, 2006 or 7. And in fact, their headquarters were actually in the same offices as me in the New York Google office. Now, if you look at this big graphic, what you see are blue dots, big and small, different sizes. What those blue dots represent are different startups, different companies. And the size of the startups indicate their influence to other companies. And then you see all these lines, the orange, the green, the blue, the purple, right, the pink. What those lines represent is the type of influence. And if you remember, I said those lines represent mentorship, inspiration, investment, going on to create other ones. And as you can see, a lot of them actually all of them trace back to DoubleClick. But the reality is, when you take a step back, this is like a galaxy. It's a constellation of startups, right? It's a constellation of startups that were influenced and created because of this ecosystem. And when you take another step back and you look at networks, and over the course of time, what you see is this cumulative effect, this cumulative impact of connections and influence over the course of time, which obviously impacts the New York tech ecosystem. So when I think about Seoul, right, I think that there's so many similar characteristics to New York City. I think there's an amazing opportunity here. I've talked to many folks here, and you have a lot of great elements. Obviously, you've had early startup and unicorn success with Coupang and some others. You have a far more advanced technology infrastructure, as you have far superior speeds. So there are advantages there. You have an emerging technology ecosystem, and you have an international city with large industries. But there is one problem, and here's the problem. The big problem is this. As an investor, and I do invest, obviously, we invest to make a return on our money. We invest to make money. And in the US, over 80% of all of the capital exits, over 80% are mergers and acquisitions, M&A, and 18% are IPO. Whereas in Korea, the challenge here is that it's only 2%, that's it. Only 2% are M&A, and then about 24% IPO. But the problem with the IPO is this: the average market cap of an IPO company is $60 million. So the inherent challenge here is that there's not a lot of exits from an M&A perspective, and those that do go IPO are not really large-scale exits. So what's the solution? And I think the previous speaker might have touched upon this, but I think we can look towards Israel, as we know that it's a 6 million person country with amazing success. They have the most startups per capita. And there's a lot of reasons. There's been a lot of studies of why Israel has been so successful. But I think one of the common themes at this conference is that we need to connect and build bridges to the US, right? Now, Waze was a startup company out of Israel that was acquired by Google. Many other companies were acquired by Google out of Israel. And I think the key is, how do we connect and build a bridge? And I did an interview earlier today, and I said there's a couple of ways to really create these bridges. The first thing I would say is, in America, Korea represents the third most number of foreign students. So you have all these folks coming from Korea into the US. That's a natural connection. That's a natural bridge. A lot of folks are being educated in the US, right? So I think there's a pathway there. Another pathway is that there's obviously a lot of Korean Americans like myself that reside in the US. And there is an appetite there to really help the folks here in Korea. So it's a matter of connecting with them. So I think that's just the beginning of how we can start creating these bridges, because the Korean Americans that do live in the US are in these great industries where you want to create partnerships, right? Because by going to the US, there's a couple of things you need to do. You need to create strategic partnerships. Strategic partnerships create scale, right? Scale is very important. And also, also importantly, you want to get VC funding from the US. And that's what the Israeli startups did so successfully, that when they came to the US, they got funding from US VCs, which are very important, which will ultimately lead to exits. So let me finish with this, and these are my final 3 thoughts. You know, if you're a startup founder out there, you know, or at the beginning of your journey or midway through your journey, I think one of the main things I want to emphasize is tap into networks. Find successful founders and mentors. What I didn't mention from that study earlier, from the Endeavor Insight study, is that if you are mentored or if you're connected to a top founder within that category, you are twice as likely to succeed versus somebody else. So it's very important to have these connections to these mentors and to connect with people at the top of their industry. The second thing is build a bridge into the US, find strategic partners and VCs, as I mentioned. And the final thing is, if you are a successful entrepreneur, if you've had success, and I think about myself, about the people who've mentored me and all that, reinvest your time, your capital, your networks back into the ecosystem. Because leadership is about reinvesting into people. And by doing that, as we saw in that study, that is what accelerated the tech ecosystem in New York City. And I think a lot of the elements are here in Seoul. I think that reinvestment will accelerate the ecosystem. So if you are a successful entrepreneur, I would say this: if you're successful, we all become successful. Thank you very much. Thank you.